It happened quietly at first. No dramatic press conference, no flashing lights on the courthouse steps, just a ruling. A few pages released by the Supreme Court sent immediate shockwaves through Washington, Wall Street, and every corner of the political world. The language was clinical, restrained, almost cold, but the meaning was unmistakable. The Trump Organization, as it had existed for decades, was ordered to be completely dissolved. For a moment, the noise stopped. Cable news anchors paused mid-sentence. Analysts stared at their screens. Even longtime allies struggled to process what they were seeing. This was not a fine or a temporary restriction. This was the court drawing a final line and declaring that this entity could not continue. Within minutes, headlines exploded across the internet. Social media lit up with disbelief, celebration, outrage, and confusion. Supporters called it political persecution. Critics called it long overdue accountability. Everyone agreed on one thing: this was unprecedented. The Trump Organization was more than a business. It was a symbol, a brand deeply intertwined with politics, power, and personal identity. Ordering its dissolution was not just about buildings or balance sheets. It was the legal system asserting dominance over a name that had spent years testing its limits. Then came the second shock. As politicians scrambled to react, one voice cut through the chaos with calm precision: Warren Buffett. No shouting, no partisan framing, just a measured response. He didn't speak about Trump directly. He spoke about rules, markets, and what happens when institutions finally enforce standards that everyone claims to respect, but few expect to be applied evenly. That contrast mattered. Trump's world thrives on spectacle. Buffett's world runs on credibility. And when Buffett speaks during moments like this, investors listen, regulators listen, and history tends to take notes. This was no longer just a legal ruling, it was a signal. Power has limits, brands are not shields, and even the most defiant empires can be dismantled when the system decides it has had enough. To understand how it reached this point, the story had to be traced backward. For years, the Trump Organization operated at the intersection of business and politics while scrutiny steadily intensified. Tax investigations, allegations of misleading lenders, lawsuits over financial disclosures, and civil claims challenging asset valuations all accumulated. Individually, each case appeared manageable. Together, they formed a pattern courts could no longer ignore. Investigators documented discrepancies across years. Real estate transactions, corporate filings, and financial statements were examined line by line. Legal teams argued that the organization's structure allowed repeated misuse and that violations were systemic, not accidental. Lower courts issued findings that painted a troubling picture: patterns of misrepresentation, internal communications raising red flags, and financial practices skirting legal boundaries. Appeals were filed and delayed. The defense argued precedent, technicalities, and economic consequences, but courts grew increasingly unconvinced. What made the case extraordinary wasn't just legal merit, it was visibility. Every filing was dissected publicly, debated by legal scholars, and analyzed in the media. This was never just about accounting errors, it was about accountability at the highest level. When the Supreme Court issued its ruling, the language was precise and unflinching. The justices relied on facts and precedent, concluding that the organization had repeatedly misrepresented assets in ways that violated civil and corporate regulations. These were not minor errors. They were systemic issues embedded in the company's structure. The court determined the organization was incapable of operating within the law without continued violations. That assessment left only one remedy: full dissolution. Operations were ordered to cease, assets to be liquidated, and oversight mechanisms put in place to ensure compliance. Trustees would monitor the process, financial records would be scrutinized, and no component would be allowed to continue under misleading pretenses. Legal analysts immediately noted the historical weight of the decision. Corporate dissolutions of this scale are rare, especially when tied to a politically prominent figure. The ruling was framed as both corrective and preventive, emphasizing that no entity is above the law. Markets reacted quickly. Assets tied to Trump Organization projects saw sharp declines. Media coverage went nonstop. Social media exploded. Supporters called it persecution. Critics called it justice, and the nation watched the fallout unfold in real time. Trump responded with defiance and outrage, framing the decision as politically motivated and personal. His messaging aimed to energize supporters, dominate headlines, and cast himself as a victim of a biased system. Legal observers, however, noted that the ruling left little room for reversal. Appeals would be difficult, and the dissolution process had already begun. Politically, the shockwaves were just as powerful. Republican leaders were forced to respond, balancing loyalty with pragmatism. Some distanced themselves cautiously, others rallied behind Trump. Democrats highlighted accountability and the rule of law. Social media reflected a nation sharply divided. By the end of the day, the story dominated headlines, boardrooms, and living rooms across the country. A legal hammer had fallen, and its impact was impossible to ignore. This was not just a business collapse or a political controversy. It was a moment that tested the limits of power, the reach of the law, and the strength of American institutions, with history watching closely.